boy, red coat. Look over here." The man laughed as he snapped his fingers just inches from the royal guard's face outside Windsor Castle. "Don't just stand there. You're part of the show, right?" But the guard didn't move. Not when the coin clinked at his boot. Because today's post wasn't for tourists. It was for a funeral. His mother's. So before we look further how justice served, comment, salute, and let us know where you're watching from. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. The sun glinted off his brass buttons, every detail of the Queen's ceremonial post uniform perfectly in place. The crowd, caught between discomfort and amusement, shifted. A group of teenagers laughed softly behind their phones. One woman frowned and lowered her camera. Another father turned his son away. Most weren't sure what to feel. It was only a joke, wasn't it? Only one man, older than the rest, stepped back from the rail and took off his cap. Silver-haired, blazer pressed flat, ribbons aligned like memories across his chest. His hand went to his brow, then dropped gently to his heart. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He knew. He had stood like that once, years ago, and he recognized the storm behind the stillness. The man with the phone didn't stop. "You're like a statue, mate. Come on, give me something. Do the eyebrow thing or whatever it is you people do." He laughed again, this time louder, trying to get others to laugh with him, trying to make the uniform part of the entertainment. The guard didn't move, but something changed. His gloved hand clenched once, a full breath in, then stillness again. The laughter didn't reach him. The cameras didn't matter. Not when the boots he wore had carried him through 2 tours in the Balkans, and now, one step at a time, led him to this very place on funeral duty. Not for a stranger, but for the woman who gave him her name and her silence. The breeze picked up just enough to lift the corner of his left sleeve, revealing a thin strip of fabric, a black mourning ribbon, stitched discreetly at the cuff. It fluttered once, then fell still again. No one noticed. Not yet. But soon they would. And when they did, they wouldn't laugh. They wouldn't even speak. They'd remember the guard who didn't blink, because blinking would have broken everything she taught him to carry. He didn't even flinch, and that said everything. Isaiah Monroe had never been one for words. Not when silence had raised him, steadied him, and stood beside him in the darkest places war had taken his family. He was born in Manchester, an ordinary city for a boy whose lineage was anything but. His mother, Sergeant Anne Monroe, had worn her own uniform, long before he ever dreamed of standing at Windsor Castle. She served in the dust and fire of Afghanistan, not with a rifle, but with gauze, grit, and hands that never hesitated. A combat nurse, a healer where the bullets didn't wait. She saved men whose names were never recorded and sat beside the dying when no one else would. Her service ribbons gathered dust in a drawer, not because she didn't value them, but because she believed the living were the only medals that mattered. This morning, before the gates opened to tourists and the courtyard filled with chatter, Anne Monroe was lowered into the ground at the Royal Hospital Chelsea Veterans Garden, a resting place for soldiers without headlines. Isaiah stood 3 paces behind her casket. He didn't weep. He didn't speak. He simply stood there in full ceremonial uniform, the same one she used to press with quiet pride when he was still learning to salute. When he requested to stand guard at Windsor today, his commanding officer didn't ask why. He saw the black band stitched into Isaiah's cuff, and that was enough. The request was approved, quietly, no speech, no notice given, just a silent post, held not for the tourists, not for tradition, but for her. His final salute. one she'd never see, but would have understood better than anyone else. Across the courtyard now, a different man fumbled with his phone. Gordon Miles, 52. Loud, amused by his own jokes, flashing peace signs for his third wife's camera. He called it a bucket list trip, said he wanted a bit of Britain before it all went soft. What he didn't mention was that his own mother had passed away 2 days ago. Quietly, in a hospice on the edge of town. No flags, no rifles, no son by her side. He hadn't answered the call when they told him. Said he was on holiday and couldn't make it. Now here he stood, grinning at Isaiah's face like it was a mask and not a man. Oblivious, entitled, still unaware of the funeral duty unfolding in front of him. Isaiah didn't blink, didn't flinch. Not because he didn't hear Gordon's mocking tone, but because he remembered the steadiness of his mother's hands when the pain was too much for others to hold. The contrast played itself out in silence. One man laughed at his own reflection in a phone screen. The other stood for a woman who'd spent her life keeping strangers alive. A black mourning ribbon shifted gently in the breeze. The same wind rustled the tourist map in Gordon's back pocket. He didn't notice. 2 sons, breathing the same air. One forgot her name. The other never forgot her silence. Come on, soldier boy. You're not even real military. This is cosplay with rules. Gordon's voice sliced through the Windsor Castle courtyard like a rusted blade. Loud, dismissive, and sharp with smugness. He raised his phone again, camera already rolling, as if he were directing a comedy sketch. But there was no laughter in the guard's eyes. There wasn't even a flicker. Isaiah Monroe stood unmoving, his ceremonial uniform spotless, his presence wrapped in the solemn quiet of duty. A royal guard at Windsor Castle, not for display, but for something deeper. Something Gordon couldn't begin to fathom. Gordon took a step closer, his trainers crunching on the gravel as he shifted deliberately into the guard's ceremonial path, an invisible boundary every seasoned tourist knew not to cross. A smile for the history books, Buckingham bobblehead. He grinned, hovering inches from Isaiah's face. You're here for me, mate. Pose? The air changed. Not loud, not sudden, but the kind of subtle shift only silence can carry. A nearby mother instinctively reached for her child's hand. A young woman with a DSLR lowered it without clicking. In the far corner of the crowd, an older man in a beret with faded medals on his chest muttered under his breath, "He's standing for someone." But Gordon didn't hear him. Or maybe he didn't care. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a pound coin, and tossed it toward the base of Isaiah's boots. It landed with a small metallic ping that echoed louder than any shout. The kind of sound that clung to stone and memory. Several heads turned. A couple of gasps surfaced. One teenage boy caught it all on video. Phone tilted just enough to frame Isaiah's motionless face next to the glinting coin. Gordon laughed again, louder this time. Look at this guy. He's not even blinking. I swear they're trained to be lifeless. His laughter was hollow, like clapping in a cathedral. A man in his 70s, draped in the quiet authority of someone who had once stood post himself, leaned toward his granddaughter and said gently, "No, they're trained to honor." It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. The words fell between the noise, and somehow they stayed. Isaiah remained frozen, but not numb, not detached. Inside that uniform beat the weight of a morning burial, 1,000 unspoken memories, and one final promise kept. His mother's name wasn't printed on bronze. Her photo didn't hang in the castle halls. But this was her post, requested in silence, guarded in steel. Gordon couldn't see any of that. All he saw was a target he thought couldn't hit back. "Seriously, who trains you guys?" Gordon scoffed again. "You just stand there like wax statues. It's ridiculous." The crowd began to murmur now, no longer amused, not quite outraged, but caught in the uncomfortable space between a man's ignorance and a soldier's restraint. A woman near the rail said softly, "He's not pretending. You are." Her husband gave her arm a squeeze. "Let it play out," he said, voice tight. And it did. Slowly, without flash or fanfare. Isaiah's right foot shifted. Just once. No stomp, no dramatic turn. Just a controlled, almost imperceptible correction in stance. Not from anger, not to break formation, but because the ache in his chest threatened to bend even the strongest man's spine. That shift wasn't weakness. It was grief, held in steel. A question hung in the air, not asked aloud, but felt in every breathless pause. What's more powerful, silence in service or noise in ignorance? The answer, like Isaiah's gaze, didn't flinch, and that said everything. The laughter stalled, not because Gordon ran out of breath, but because something in the air changed. A man in the crowd had stepped forward, not with drama, but with weight. He wore the stillness of someone who had once saluted the Queen, his Royal Navy blazer stitched with years most had forgotten. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "That man's not here for your camera," he said, his words landing like stone on polished tile. That post today was a request, its funeral duty, for a soldier's mother. The courtyard froze. Gordon's grin faded, confusion swimming behind his sunglasses. "Whose mother?" he asked, louder than he meant to. His voice cracked in the wrong places. The veteran didn't answer, not with words. He simply nodded once, slowly, and motioned toward Isaiah's cuff, where a black mourning ribbon fluttered faintly in the breeze. That detail, so small, suddenly felt like it filled the entire square. Isaiah didn't move, not until it mattered. Then his lips parted. His voice didn't waver. It didn't tremble. It didn't rise. This post was requested. For her 7 words, each one clean, British, Northern, grounded like a bell tolling across the stones of Windsor Castle. And still. His eyes never left the horizon. Gordon tried to laugh again, but the sound didn't come. Instead, he scoffed, "Who's she?" A duchess? He didn't know how to backpedal, so he attacked instead. But behind him, the rhythm of a cane tapped slowly against stone. A frail woman, white-haired, stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly, her voice stronger than it should have been. "No," she said, "a nurse, war hero, and your mother." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was sacred. Tourists lowered their cameras without being asked. A child took his father's hand. No one dared to move. Even the pigeons stopped fluttering. Gordon blinked, suddenly looking very small in the wide space around him. "My mother?" he repeated, not believing the shape of the words in his own mouth. The veteran stepped closer. Her name was Anne Monroe. She served in Afghanistan, saved more lives than anyone counted. She died Wednesday. The hospital called you twice. You didn't answer. Gordon's knees almost buckled. His breath caught, hands falling to his sides like forgotten tools. He looked at Isaiah, finally looked, and the man in front of him was no statue, no actor, no tourist trap. He was grief carved into granite. And he had stood there, honoring her, without needing Gordon's permission or presence. Isaiah didn't move, not even as the wind tugged at the mourning ribbon again. The moment had passed, but it stayed, like mist after rain, and it whispered something louder than rage could ever carry. That silence said everything. Gordon sank onto the low stone wall beside the courtyard fountain, like the weight of his past had finally landed. His legs had carried arrogance moments before. Now they barely held the truth. Around him, the atmosphere had shifted. The breeze still moved, but the crowd didn't. The laughter from earlier had vanished, evaporated like warmth from sunlit marble. No one reached for a camera anymore. The tourists, once amused spectators, now stood still, watching not for entertainment, but out of quiet reckoning. A man, middle-aged, clean-shaven, holding his child's backpack, offered Gordon a folded tissue from his pocket. Gordon didn't take it, just shook his head slightly, eyes fixed on nothing. His wife, a woman far younger than the grief in front of her, leaned down and whispered, "You said she passed peacefully. You didn't say—" But he couldn't finish that sentence, couldn't find the bridge between distance and devotion, between the woman he dismissed and the silence standing in her honor now. Isaiah Monroe did not flinch. His posture didn't shift, didn't weaken, didn't demand to be noticed. He had spoken once, and that had been enough. He did not need applause. He did not need the world to know. But Windsor Castle knew. The courtyard knew. And now so did Gordon. One figure moved, slowly, reverently. The old woman with the cane stepped toward the ceremonial post, her hand pressed over her chest. She didn't touch him. She didn't speak loud. Just offered 3 words. "We remember her." Behind her, another figure came into view. A former paratrooper, medals loose on his jacket, white beard trimmed with military care. He raised his hand in a formal salute, sharp and steady. Not to royalty, to the man in uniform who hadn't moved an inch for his mother's honor. He didn't move, but the world did. That line didn't echo in sound. It echoed in feeling, in the way the crowd suddenly respected the barrier rope, in how lenses dropped to sides not from rules but reverence, in the way children asked no questions and adults had no answers. Tourists turned one by one. No footsteps rushed, no voices returned. They just walked, slower than when they'd arrived, each carrying something heavier than they could explain. The guard remained still, but their hearts moved. That's when you know dignity wins, not in the noise, but in the hush that follows. Gordon remained seated long after the others had gone. The courtyard emptied, the air cooled, and still he sat, elbows resting on his knees, eyes lost in the stone beneath his feet. The place where he had mocked now felt sacred. Every word he had said earlier rang in his ears with a bitterness he couldn't swallow. His phone, once clutched like a weapon of amusement, now lay untouched on the bench beside him. It wasn't silence that punished him. It was the memory of the silence he had tried to break, and the man who never once flinched. He rose slowly, as if carrying something too heavy to name. Walked toward the ceremonial gate where Isaiah still stood motionless. No apology passed his lips, no grand gesture attempted. Just a folded note, placed quietly at the edge of the fence. No signature. Just 8 words, written with the gravity of a man who finally understood what he'd missed. "I didn't show up for her, but you did. Thank you. Isaiah never looked down, never broke posture. But somewhere in the stillness of his breath, something passed. Not forgiveness, not closure, just recognition, that sometimes regret must be carried, not erased." Weeks later, the guard post changed. Not in appearance, not in uniform, but in purpose. Isaiah Monroe was reassigned quietly to Royal Remembrance Services, a ceremonial unit that oversees tributes for veterans' families throughout the United Kingdom. It was an honor not spoken about in parades, but deeply understood among those who had worn the uniform. The modern Royal Guard funeral duty had found its soul in him. At Windsor Castle, something else changed. A small bronze plaque was mounted beside the post where Isaiah had stood that day. Nothing grand, just one line. For those who stand in silence, carrying more than a rifle. Tourists began to pause when they passed it. Some removed their hats. A few lingered in silence longer than they intended. They didn't always know why, but something about the air around that spot felt different. The flash of memory returned, quiet and full of weight. That morning, hours before the jeers and laughter, a simple military funeral had taken place in the Royal Hospital Chelsea Veterans Garden. A closed casket draped in white, a single black ribbon tied to the handle. No grand eulogy, no media, just one son, standing 3 paces behind, unmoving. He didn't cry, he didn't blink, but he was there, fully, silently, steadily present. It wasn't just a British war nurse funeral tribute. It was the full weight of legacy passed from mother to son, a legacy carried not in medals but in posture, in patience, in presence, a legacy the world almost laughed past, until it didn't. That same guard post still stands, same Windsor Castle stone, same Royal Guard tradition. But now, the crowd stays respectfully behind the rope. Cameras are lowered sooner. Laughter comes softer. Something unseen hangs in the air. Not sorrow, awareness. He didn't speak. He didn't demand. He just showed up for her. And that changed everything. Some people confuse silence with surrender. But what we witnessed today was something else entirely. It was a kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't strike. It just stands. Stands in memory, in love, in duty. In Windsor Castle's long shadow, amid the tourists and cameras, one man stood not for the eyes watching him, but for the life that gave him breath. A mother laid to rest in honor, and a son who gave her a final tribute through stillness more powerful than words. What does honor look like when there's no spotlight? When there's no one to cheer or post or clap? Today, it wore a uniform. It clenched a gloved fist once. It stood for British military tradition and for something far older than ceremony. And maybe it taught someone watching that silent tribute can say more than 1,000 apologies ever could. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in honor. Must share your thoughts below. We love to listen back from you. Don't forget to subscribe and press notification button so you will never miss our next video where the truth doesn't yell. It stands tall.